Welcome to A Mind for Life. We are here today with the sixth video in the series on brainwashing. Brainwashing 101, the mini-series, has its conclusion today in this video. Now, we're talking about shadow work. Shadow work is going into those dark places in our lives that may be painful, that maybe we swept under the rug or put into the closet, that maybe we're embarrassed about talking about. Shadow work means going into those places because in those places is where the treasure often is, the breakthrough. Now, you have to do this according to your tolerance level, and I call it shadow tolerance. You know, if you're depressed, if you're mad at the world, you got a chip on your shoulder every single day, everything's cool. You just need to come out of the shadow places so much. But we need to work with the shadow because in the shadow contains the fullness of our lives. To have a full life means that you're an artist of your life. Artists deal with the shadow. If we look out into the world, we see light and shadow. Okay. Now, in the last video, I talked about self-honesty and how being honest with the self leads to us being free from brainwashing. If you don't know what you really want, but you say you want something else, you can be open to getting brainwashed because you're not clear about what you really want. And therefore, your door is open for anything. Now, you can go back and watch the last video on that. In this video, we're talking about individuality. How individuality helps us to come out from underneath the brainwashing. Removes us from the brainwashing, prevents the brainwashing from happening. Individuality. Now, I said in the first video, you cannot brainwash yourself, and I still say that. Brainwashing is the covert, deliberate changing of another's perspective according to a plan or an agenda. This is covert, people. You cannot do this for yourself. If you're telling yourself you're great 1,000,000 times a day and you call that brainwashing, it's not brainwashing because brainwashing is covert. It's done without you knowing it. That is changing what you know, what you believe, and what your perspectives are to lead yourself to a different life experience. You're doing this deliberately. You're saying I'm great 1,000,000 times a day. That's not brainwashing yourself. That's the perspective generating mechanism that we talked about before. Now, what group are you a part of? Because this is going to get into this. Every individual is composed of several groups. Where you were born, that's a group. You call it your nationality. What you do, your career, that's a group. What your interests are, that's a group. Where you may live right now, that's a group. Your political affiliation, that's a group. Now, you can re-brainwash yourself through these groups. I call it a group mythos, a group story, the narrative. If you're a part of a group and you just find yourself as part of a group because the people look like you or they're where you're from or they do what you do, you're spinning a narrative that you didn't choose consciously. You're spinning categories and stories. Even stereotypes is a harsher word, but you're spinning these things about who you are, and they may not serve you. To choose a group means that you choose to be a part of a group based upon what you want to be, do, and have. A group has lost its critical facility. An individual will subordinate their own self-reflection to support that group, what they think and feel, their position. If you begin to assert your own ideas in the midst of the group, you may be called a rebel. You may be called a renegade. We see this throughout history. I call this emergent group consciousness, or emergent individual consciousness, meaning that the individual has begun to separate themselves from the group by asking questions, by seeing things differently. We see this in history. Martin Luther King says, why can't we be equal? Not just separate, but equal. But why can't we be truly equal? Slavery had happened in this country for hundreds of years. That was a group mind. That was group consciousness. And it reinforced itself. That's how it was able to sustain for so long. Until we had the emergent individual consciousness that said, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this. How is it that in Nazi Germany, millions could be killed in the midst of a nation? That's a group consciousness that allowed that to happen. So the group consciousness may not be the right consciousness, but if we're following the group and we're not aware, but we just call ourselves whatever we call ourselves, we're spinning the ideas of the group. When I was growing up, I used to think that if I got wet in the rain, I would get sick. That's group consciousness right there. That's a group think. In other words, if you go outside and it rains on you, your feet get wet, you're going to have pneumonia and be in the hospital. You're finished. And don't let your head get wet. See, this is what I believed growing up. And it was strong. It was the group. Who am I as an individual to contest the group? But I figured, oh, wait, if my hand got wet, I wouldn't get sick. I'm still using the thought patterns of the group, you see. I'm still within that box. Until I had to get wet and I didn't want to be sick. Then I had to ask another question. Well, if I'm in the shower every single day and I don't get sick, why is it that if I get wet outside, I'm going to get sick? And that question led me down a different pathway. You see, I became emergent from that group. So we can be spinning the ideas of the group unawares. This is re-brainwashing ourselves with that perspective. Every group has its own perspective. Now, are you choosing the perspective? You should choose your perspectives, but are you choosing this group based on its perspective serving you? That's what matters. In other words, what you want to be, do, and have, are you a part of this group for that reason? Or are you just calling yourself this because other people call themselves that, who are where you are, or are from where you're from, or who look like you look, or who do what you do? Now, this is exposing the occult. Occult means hidden. Exposing it means this. If you are in a group and you're using the thought structures of the group, the stereotypes, you're applying that to yourself and other people, and you're not aware of it. You think you're being introspective and self-reflecting and considering things, but you're just using the thoughts of the group. It is a circularity. You're just retelling the group mythos over and over again. If you're doing that, you're brainwashed, but you're not only brainwashed, you are recycling the narrative that you're under, that you took on unawares. And this is for all of us. So we should all ask this question. Why am I this? Why do I call myself that? Does this really serve me? See, as we begin to ask these questions, we begin to have more freedom. We begin to come out from under the brainwashing or stop the brainwashing. Hey, I don't want to be a part of that group because it doesn't lead me to where I want to be. Now, sometimes it's easy. But what about these more subtle groups, like your nationality, like your career? How is it that you can ask this? And you can. But the question is, can I choose these things based upon what I want to be, do, and have? Okay, so that is the last aspect to this. The third aspect to how to become unbrainwashed or stop the brainwashing. Begin to ask questions. Is being a group. Now, listen, let me say this. Being part of a group is not a bad thing. But are you a part of a group because it moves you into being and doing and having what your heart's desires really are, and you know what your heart desires really are. So it's not a bad thing to be a part of a group. So that's the third aspect, individuality. The first, we had three aspects to this. You want to become self-aware. You want to choose your thoughts, and individuality. You want to be aware of the group consciousness that you're part of. So I hope this series gave you some more freedom. I hope this series moved you into a place of asking different questions. Many are part of a large mass group right now in this time that are moving according to fear, according to an agenda, and is based on fear. Are you a part of that group? Does that being a part of that group lead you to being, doing, and having what is your truly heart's desire? That's a question. And that's the individual part. Now, as you ask these individual questions, much like Galileo, is the earth really the middle of everything? Or is the sun the middle? We want to ask these sorts of questions that led him to house arrest. He had that emergent individual consciousness. So that's the third aspect. And go back and watch the previous videos to unfold this brainwashing, because I think it's going into the shadow work here. It is really important to do the shadow work. Okay? So thanks for coming to A Mindful Life. Peace out.